This story was narrated by VidCrew Media. Please show your support by like and subscribe. Thank you. Jared caught on to the situation and leaped forward, pulling Jeffrey back before he could escape. Once Hilda reached them, she pulled at Jeffrey's hair and shrieked, "Jeffrey, didn't you claim that you had a say in the deal with Cosmic Chemical? How dare you lie to me and dangle the contract over my head to force me into your bed? You bastard!" She pounded him repeatedly as she vented her rage, and Jeffrey silently endured her raining fists. A murderous aura had begun to emanate from Jared as he understood the situation. So Jeffrey was blackmailing Hilda with the contract. If I didn't come here to sign it myself, he would have gotten away with his scheme. Sometime later, Hilda stopped hitting Jeffrey out of exhaustion. Her eyes had welled with tears as she turned to Jared and muttered, "Jared, I didn't want you to get fired. That's the only reason I agreed to this B-Star's proposal." "Don't worry, Hilda. I understand." He comforted her before staring daggers at Jeffrey, sensing his murderous aura. Jeffrey shook in fear and begged for mercy. I know I was wrong. It was all a joke. We used to be classmates. How could I bring myself to take advantage of her like that?" His profuse apologies fell on deaf ears. Jared announced, "I don't want to kill anyone today." He tightened his grip on Jeffrey's elbow, and an immense wave of spiritual energy emanated from his body, smashing the bones in Jeffrey's arm into smithereens. "Arg!" Jeffrey let out an ear-splitting scream of agony. Unbeknownst to Jeffrey, the bones in his arm had been pulverized to an irreparable degree. "Jared." Hilda immediately pulled Jared aside after his show of force. She was worried that Jared would kill Jeffrey for her sake and land himself in jail again. Faced with her concern, Jared stopped tormenting Jeffrey and turned his attention to a shell-shocked Raymond. "Green, this is your employee. Please deal with him as you see fit." Raymond nodded hastily and assured him repeatedly of his intention to discipline Jeffrey. Jared and Hilda soon left before they overstayed their welcome. The former was confident that Raymond would teach Jeffrey a proper lesson. When they returned to Sentiment Chemical Limited, everyone in the sales department was floored. They even took turns reading the contract to verify its authenticity. After that, they stared at Jared in disbelief, unable to imagine how he had secured a contract with Cosmic Chemical in such a short time. Zane held the contract with shaky hands. As the manager of the sales department, he was the only person who knew the true value of the contract, as well as the lucrative commission he was set to receive. Despite his hatred and bone-deep desire to fire Jared, he could not deny that Jared had inadvertently handed him a windfall. Still, Zane tried his best to suppress his excitement. Putting on a nonchalant expression, he said, "Jared, you managed to secure this contract thanks to Maria's and my efforts in the past. Don't get too cocky just yet. You may have passed this round and spared yourself from the chopping block. That doesn't mean you'll pass the next evaluation." After that, Zane kept the contract and beelined for the general manager's office, eager to share the great news. "Zane, wait up." Maria followed him after his departure from the sales department. He stopped after seeing that Maria was running after him. "Can you tell me how much you learned from this contract?" Maria knew the commission from the contract was sizable, but she was curious about the exact sum. Zane beamed as he replied, "Haven't you had your eyes on the houses in Dragon Bay for a while? We can check them out tomorrow, and you can pick any unit you like. We're about to roll in riches thanks to this contract, and we'll definitely be able to afford a nice house then." When Maria heard that, she almost leapt with joy. She asked excitedly, "Really? Looks like Jared isn't that useless." I think that he's merely relying on the foundations we've built previously." Zane scoffed, thinking that Jared did not deserve the credit. "Yeah. If we hadn't worked on it beforehand, Jared wouldn't have gotten the contract signed so easily." Maria agreed as she nodded. "All right. I'll pass the contract to Mr. Jennings. He'll definitely reward me. Perhaps he might even transfer me to the procurement department." With that, Zane went to the general manager's office happily with the contract. As he was overjoyed, he entered without even knocking. Right then, Xavier was in the middle of the call. Upon noticing someone barging in all of a sudden, he ended the call directly. Xavier's expression turned grim when he saw Zane. Knowing that he had just gotten himself into trouble, Zane trembled in fear. He raised the contract and declared, Mr. Jennings, we've signed the contract with Cosmic Chemical. Since this is an important contract, perhaps Xavier won't be angry after hearing such news. However, Zane was mistaken. Immediately after he spoke, Xavier became furious. Get lost. Get lost now. Then he threw a cup at Zane fiercely. Crash! The sound of the cup shattering into pieces shocked Zane, causing him to scurry out in fear. Gritting his teeth, Xavier panted heavily in fury. He had already known that Jared managed to sign the contract with Cosmic Chemical. Initially, he had wanted Jared to be humiliated there, but Leighton had ended up being embarrassed instead. The call earlier was from Leighton, who had given Xavier a harsh scolding. Xavier only became associated with Leighton because he no longer wanted to stay with the Sullivan family. As Leighton could use his betrayal of the Sullivan family as blackmail, he had no choice but to endure Leighton's scoldings. Zane, what did Mr. Jennings say? Did he mention the commission? Maria asked happily when she saw Zane return. Forget it. I don't know what's wrong with him. Today. He even scolded me. Holding the contract, Zane returned to his office unhappily. Maria hurried behind and consoled him. At noon, Jared packed his belongings and prepared to head to the Sullivan residence. After all, he had promised Josephine to dine with William. Jared, you managed to secure such an important contract today. Why don't we celebrate it over lunch? I know a really good restaurant nearby, Hilda suggested happily. Stunned, Jared replied awkwardly, I'm busy this afternoon, so you may go ahead and enjoy your lunch. Let's celebrate at night. Hearing that, Hilda became a bit disappointed. All right, then? Watching as Jared left the office, Hilda felt like there was a gap between the two of them. She could not understand Jared, nor could she manage to capture his heart. After Jared left the office, he wanted to drive his Ford over. However, he suddenly saw Josephine sitting in a car and honking at him. Since Josephine had personally come to pick him up, Jared kept his car keys and walked toward her. Are you so free that you've come to pick me up personally? Jared asked with a smile after getting into the car. I'm just afraid that you'd stand me up. Mr. Grange has already reached. If you don't go, I'll be so embarrassed. With that, Josephine slammed her foot on the accelerator, and the car sped forward. At that moment, Hilda was standing beside a window upstairs. She saw Jared getting into a red luxurious car that was driven by a woman. However, as she was too far away, she could not see what the woman looked like. She could not help but feel upset upon seeing Jared leave with a woman. Jared, did you refuse to eat with me because of this woman? Hilda mumbled, tears welling up in her eyes. Meanwhile, William and Walter were sitting in the living room at the Sullivan residence and chatting over tea. In the past, William would never have a chance to chat with Walter over tea, even though he was the richest man in Horrington. However, William's identity was different now. Since everyone already knew him as Jared's father-in-law, his status had become much more prominent than being the richest man in Horrington. Soon, Josephine and Jared arrived. When Walter saw Jared, he quickly stood up. Mr. Chance, don't stand on ceremony. Mr. Grange. You look very healthy recently, said Jared with a smile. It's all thanks to you. Otherwise, my frail body would have already been destroyed by that vengeful dragon. Walter knew that it was all thanks to Jared that he could remain so healthy. Were it not for Jared's intervention, he would have collapsed after sitting on the dragon throne all the time. You have strong physique, Mr. Grange, replied Jared amiably. Jared, I heard from Josephine that you're working at Sentiment Chemical Limited now. Is that true? William asked Jared. Yeah, I'm a salesman now. He nodded. Why bother with that? When I asked you if you like business, you said that you don't. Yet. You've become a petty salesman now. Are you planning to start from the bottom? Probed William. Jared shook his head. He did not know how to explain. When he attended the interview, he did not know that the company belonged to the Sullivan family. Furthermore, He did not plan on working for a long time. He merely wanted to put his parents at ease for the time being. Noticing Jared's silence, William continued, I've already made arrangements for you to take over Josephine's position as the chairman next Monday. Since she won't be going to the office for the next 2 months. I'm worried about leaving everything in Xavier's hands. Jared was stunned when he heard that. Quickly waving his hands, he protested, I'm not up for that. Sullivan. I really don't have time to manage a company. I'm only working as a salesman to pacify my parents. I have more important things to do. Jared did not want to be hindered by these trivial matters. He needed to spend more time training, or he would not be able to go to Nameless Island on the 15th of July. Stop declining. This is settled, then. I'm not asking you to work in the office every day. You can just focus on your personal matters. Thinking that Jared was merely declining the offer out of courtesy, William forcefully made him accept it. After reading the room, Jared thought that it was inappropriate to say anything else. Since the food was already prepared, they chatted while eating. Grange, did you look for me because of the spiritual brush? Jared had only agreed to eat with them because Josephine had said that Walter wanted to meet him. Walter replied embarrassingly, Chance. I've already called Erasmus, and he's rushing back now. He'll be here in a few days. Thank you for your help, Grange. Jared eagerly wanted to cure his mother's eyes. That's nothing. However, I'd like to ask a favor from you, Chance, said Walter. Just let me know. As long as it's within my abilities, I'll definitely help, affirmed Jared with a nod. Chance, I know that you have special abilities. I have an old friend whose wife became crazy after visiting a cemetery. Despite having sought help from all sorts of doctors, he couldn't find a solution. I'm thinking that you might be able to help him out. After seeing Jared force out the vengeful dragon from the dragon throne, Walter had nothing but admiration for him. If she became crazy after visiting the cemetery, a ghost has mostly likely possessed her. It's not a big problem, said Jared calmly. If you can cure her, I'll inform my friend to bring his wife to you right now. Walter whipped out his phone happily and prepared to make a call. However, Jared raised his hand and stopped Walter. He said, we're not in a rush. Grange. It's better to see her at night. Can you give me their address? I'll visit them personally after work. Thank you, Chance. Walter thanked him profusely. It's just a simple gesture. I'm also troubling you by asking you to find the spiritual brush for me, said Jared with a smile. Since you're helping each other, you don't have to stand on ceremonies. Food is getting cold. William interrupted their conversation. Otherwise, both of them would keep exchanging pleasantries to no end. After eating, Josephine sent Jared back to the office. Jared, I'll pick you up at night and tag along with you. I've never witnessed a ghost possessing someone before, Josephine said to Jared excitedly. Aren't you afraid? Jared asked teasingly when he saw how excited she was. What's there to fear? You'll be there, right? I know that people with superb medical skills like you have ways to deal with ghosts. Some children would cry from fear, but they'll become better after the doctors recite a spell or two. There's no need for any injections or medicine, Josephine said dismissively. Jared smiled and did not say anything. Josephine might be scared out of her wits when she sees it with her own eyes later. After Jared got out of the car, Josephine drove away. Meanwhile, Hilda was still standing beside the window. She had been waiting for Jared to return because she wanted to see who the woman was. However, she still could not get a clear glimpse of the woman. All she saw was Jared getting out of the car with a bright smile. When Jared returned to the sales department, he noticed that Hilda was in a bad mood. Hence, he asked, "What's wrong, Hilda?" "Nothing." Not sparing a single glance in his direction, Hilda forced a smile and left. Jared did not think too much about it. He sat down and started working immediately. In the afternoon, a document was sent over from the headquarters of Sullivan Group. It was placed on Xavier's desk. When Xavier read the content of the document, his expression became extremely grim and menacing. The document was about a position transfer. Jared would be appointed as the chairman of Sentiment Chemical Limited from next Monday onward. In that case, he would become Xavier's direct superior. Why? Why? Xavier roared as he read the document. He immediately tore it into shreds. What's wrong, Mr. Jennings? The secretary rushed in when she heard his yells. Get lost, Xavier bellowed, causing her to scurry out. With his bloodshot eyes, Xavier looked like a complete madman. It's all your fault, Jared. It's all your fault. I'm going to kill you. Xavier gritted his teeth. Despite being a top student who had worked for the Sullivan family for years, he ended up being defeated by an ex-convict. He could not accept this fact at all. At that moment, his mind had already become twisted. A long time had passed before Xavier calmed down. Looking at the document, which had been ripped into shreds, he opened the drawer slowly. There was a gun placed inside the drawer. Staring at the gun, Xavier seemed to be making a very tough decision. He raised the gun slowly, stroking the cold steel of the gun. He made a decision. Xavier made a call to Zane. Zane, tell Jared to come to my office. Zane, who was still sitting in his office and fuming, was surprised when he received Xavier's call. Zane, why is Mr. Jennings looking for Jared? Asked Maria. How would I know? Zane frowned, as he had a feeling that something bad was about to happen. Is Mr. Jennings giving all the commission to Jared? I've already noticed that Jared is somehow associated with him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have given Jared such a good opportunity. Maria said furiously. All right, stop nagging. I'm in a bad mood now. Zane shot Maria a glare before leaving the office and walking to Jared's desk. Jared, Mr. Jennings instructed you to go to his office. It's probably about the contract. You know very well what you should say to him. If Maria and I hadn't built a good relationship with Cosmic Chemical, would you have managed to secure the contract so easily? Glancing at Zane, Jared gave a sneer. Without saying anything else, he got up and left. Zane was furious when he saw Jared's reaction. He couldn't help but murmur, HMPH. If it weren't for Maria's recommendation, you wouldn't be able to remain with this company. How dare you oppose me? I'll make you regret it sooner or later. After Jared arrived at Xavier's office, the secretary wanted to inform Xavier about Jared's arrival first. However, Jared directly pushed the door open and entered, not giving the secretary a chance to stop him. Mr. Jennings, he insisted on barging in. The secretary explained to Xavier anxiously. Staring at Jared, Xavier waved his hands at the secretary and instructed, get out. Without my permission. No one is allowed to enter. The secretary nodded and left, closing the door behind her. Take a seat. Xavier pointed at the chair in front of him. Jared did not stand on ceremony and directly sat opposite him. Just like that, they stared at each other for a minute in total silence. Why did you look for me? Speak now. I'm busy, Jared urged, since Xavier kept staying quiet. Jared, I've already investigated your background. You're just an ordinary guy and an ex-convict. Why do you deserve to be liked by Josephine? Why do you deserve to become the chairman? Why? Xavier glared at Jared intently. He could not understand why Josephine liked Jared but not him, who had studied overseas and was a top student. If Jared was a rich heir or the son of a politician, Xavier would not have felt so aggrieved. However, Jared was just an average man who was even an ex-convict. Despite that, Josephine would rather like Jared over himself. Xavier could not figure that out no matter what. Jared smirked teasingly. Liking someone doesn't require all those reasons. Josephine simply likes me. What can you do about it? His expression and tone immediately provoked Xavier. Despite his prior efforts to calm himself down, he lost his temper at that moment. Jared, I want you to leave Horrington right now and stay away from Josephine. Don't ever come back. Otherwise, I'll make you regret it. Xavier bellowed with all his might as he stared at Jared with wide eyes. Regret it? Jared smirked coldly. I've never regretted anything before. Furthermore, someone like you has no right to command me, let alone threaten me. I'll show you whether I have the right to command you. As Xavier spoke, he suddenly whipped out the gun in the drawer, and aimed it at Jared. Since it was Xavier's first time pointing a gun at someone, his hands trembled terribly. When Jared saw Xavier aiming that gun at him, a mocking smile played on his lips. Seeing that Jared was not afraid at all, Xavier roared furiously, "I'll really shoot. The moment I pull the trigger, you'd be lying in a pool of blood instantly." "Shoot, then. Your hand is trembling so much that you probably can't aim well, right? Why don't I move closer so that it's easier for you to aim?" Jared even inched closer to Xavier, so that he could get closer to the gun. Xavier flushed in fury when he saw Jared's reaction. "Jared, I will actually shoot. If you leave Horrington now, I might still spare your life. Otherwise, I'll kill you." Xavier's face was completely red. He had never killed anyone, let alone shot someone with a gun. He had assembled this gun after buying the individual parts. When he was overseas, he used to have a fascination for guns. After returning to home country where guns were strictly regulated, he had secretly assembled one. Despite liking guns, he had never shot or killed someone. Xavier was trying his best to control himself, but his hands kept trembling. Looking at Xavier, Jared sneered. "Someone like you won't even dare to kill a chicken, let alone a human. Don't force me. I'll actually shoot." Xavier's head was beaded with sweat. Although he had already made up his mind, he was still overcome with anxiety when the moment came. "If you put down the gun now, I might still spare your life. If you shoot, you'll definitely die." A cold expression crossed Jared's face as he uttered those words. "What nonsense are you talking about? I can shoot you right now and flee overseas. No one can do anything about it." Xavier did not believe Jared. Since the gun was in his hands, he reckoned that he had everything under control. "If you don't believe me, just go ahead and shoot me." Jared suddenly raised his volume, shocking Xavier. As he was taken aback, the trigger of the gun was pulled automatically. Bang! With a loud gunshot and sparks flying out of the gun muzzle, a bullet came shooting out. Xavier was surprised. He had pulled the trigger in a moment of panic, before he could prepare himself. Jared clenched his fist in the air and grabbed the bullet. Since his hand was surrounded by spiritual energy, the bullet could not harm him at all. He spread his fingers slowly, revealing the golden bullet. Did he just catch that bullet with his bare hand? Xavier was dumbfounded. The gun slid out of his hands and landed on the ground. "I said that if you shoot, you'll be the one dead." As Jared spoke, he was exuding a terrifying and murderous aura, which made Xavier tremble involuntarily, feeling the strong murderous intent from Jared. Xavier felt a chill run down his spine. It felt as if he had just plunged into the depths of hell. No, this is impossible. How could you possibly catch the bullet?" Fear was written all over Xavier's face. He kept shaking his head, refusing to believe that what he had witnessed was real. He could not comprehend what had just happened, for it was way beyond his understanding of the world. Xavier was only an ordinary man, and he was not even a martial artist. Hence, he did not know anything about martial arts. Jared narrowed his eyes. "There's nothing that's impossible. If you don't believe me, you can shoot me again." Upon meeting Jared's murderous gaze, Xavier fell from his chair and collapsed to the floor. He did not dare to pick up the gun, let alone shoot again, catching a bullet with his bare hand. Although Xavier did not believe it, that was the reality. He had no choice but to believe it. He finally understood why an ordinary man and ex-convict like Jared could win Josephine's heart. Could someone who can catch a bullet with his bare hand be an ordinary person? Beyond a shadow of a doubt, he must have some other identity that my investigation could never unearth. At that moment, Xavier also recalled how Felix didn't do anything to Jared back at Vintage Restaurant, but lashed out at him instead. Thinking back now, Felix must have been afraid of his identity. It turns out that I'm not even in the same league as him. He had always been proud that he studied abroad, and felt that he was 100 times better than Jared. However, he abruptly realized that he had been too shallow at that very instant. "Please don't kill me, I beg you." Terrified, he chickened out and admitted defeat. He was afraid of death and dared not commit murder. In fact, he had only pulled the trigger earlier, due to his raw nerves. Despite having braced himself for the possibility of killing Jared, he still didn't dare pull the trigger and take a life when it came down to it for real. At the sight of his pathetic state, Jared lost the desire to kill him. He tossed the bullet to the ground and ordered coldly, "Starting today, get out of Horrington. Don't ever appear in front of me again." After saying that, Jared spun on his heels and left the office. When he opened the office door, Xavier's secretary happened to be standing right by the door. The second she saw Xavier kneeling on the ground through the gap in the door, she was entirely stunned. Jared cast a glance at her, frightening her considerably. Nevertheless, he said nothing, nor did he bother closing the door behind him. Instead, he left it ajar and allowed her to stare at Xavier, who was on his knees. "Buzz off! Scram!" Xavier roared at his secretary. Terror-stricken, the secretary hastily bolted. Inwardly, unease lingered within her, and she was worried sick that she would be dismissed for having seen Xavier in an embarrassing state. Unbeknownst to her, Xavier slowly picked up the gun and bullet from the ground right then. After a final look at his office, he left. Ever since then, he never again appeared in the office or even in the whole of Horrington. "Jared, did Mr. Jennings ask for you to talk about the commission? What did you say to him?" Zane urgently demanded as soon as he saw Jared returning to the sales department. Although he loathed speaking to the man, he still did so for the sake of the commission. "Nothing at all," Jared replied frostily with a glance at him. "You just want to keep all the commission for yourself." Jared, let me tell you that the company policy stipulates that the manager has a share in the commission, no matter who in the sales department clinches a contract. Furthermore, we've already made several trips to Cosmic Chemical in the past few months. You couldn't have gotten the contract without us, so don't think that you're all great and mighty. If it weren't for me recommending you here, would you have been able to join the company?" Maria huffed upon seeing his glacial attitude. "I don't care about that paltry commission. If there's truly any, I won't take a single cent," Jared murmured placidly after eyeing her for a moment. "You said it yourself, and everyone heard you, Jared. Don't regret not even taking a single cent," Zane hurriedly proclaimed in a booming voice when he heard that, afraid that the man would go back on his word. "I won't regret it," Jared sneered. At once, utter elation deluged Zane. "If he doesn't want the commission, then it'll all be mine. At that time, I should be able to afford the down payment for a mansion at Drage." Everyone in the sales department gaped at Jared in shock, all laughing at him for being such a fool. The commission for such a huge contract is definitely a pretty penny, but he's simply giving it all up with a single remark. "Hilda, you're in the same team as Jared, so you must hold on to the commission although he gave it up. Don't be an idiot like him," Lydia whispered, leaning close to Hilda. Hilda stole a peek at Jared a near distance away, before she shook her head and asserted, "I don't want it either. I wasn't the one who facilitated the contract, so I don't want the commission. I'm not going to ask why he's giving it up, but perhaps it's because he has found a rich girlfriend, so he doesn't care about that trifling sum. Well, they must be both sick in the head and have some kind of grudge against money." Curling her lips, Lydia then stalked off. After getting off work, Hilda didn't hitch a ride home with Jared, but hailed a taxi home by herself. "What's wrong with her today?" Jared murmured under his breath. He could sense her being listless the entire day, and she didn't speak to him either. Having driven home, he got changed, and Josephine came to pick him up. A luxurious car idling in front of the dilapidated neighborhood attracted plenty of attention in a blink of an eye. "Who's this wealthy lady, and why is she here in our shabby neighborhood? Could it be that she has taken a fancy to one of the lads here? It's evident that she's filthy rich at a single glance, so how could she possibly be interested in the lads here?" A group of elderly ladies was sitting by the neighborhood entrance, shooting the breeze. Among them was Chloe, and she was also very curious to know who exactly the person in the car was waiting for. However, when she spotted Jared exiting the neighborhood and getting into the car, she was wholly stumped. "Chloe, that's Gary's son." "Jared, no. So he has gotten himself a rich girlfriend. I remember that he's quite close to your daughter. Hilda. What's going on here? Young people nowadays are always materialistic." The few elderly ladies gossiped among themselves, while Chloe rushed home to ask her daughter what exactly had happened. After Jared had gotten into Josephine's car, they went all the way to the suburbs in Horrington, According to the location Walter had given them, the area was undeveloped, so single-story houses predominated, and the roads were rather bumpy as well. More than an hour later, they finally arrived at their destination. By then, Walter was already waiting there. As Jared swept his gaze around, he couldn't quite believe that Walter had a good friend at such a place, considering his identity. Chance. Walter went up to Jared and greeted him courteously right away. Beside Walter stood a similarly elderly man with graying hair at his temples. However, his aura and dressing were as different as night and day from Walter. This is Chance whom I spoke of. His medical skills are unparalleled, Walter murmured to the elderly man beside him. As soon as Kieran Snyder saw Jared, he froze with disbelief written all over his face. In his mind, he pictured a professor or expert over 70 years old, since Walter had revered the person so greatly to the point of addressing him as Mr. and lauding his medical skills. Thus, he never expected Jared to be so young, a mere KLD to someone of his age. Kieran. Walter called out to the man who had fallen into a trance. Jolting back to his senses, Kieran quickly extended his dry and wrinkled hand, saying to Jared, "Oh, sorry. Nice to meet you, Chance." Jared shook his hand and inclined his head a fraction in greeting. "Kieran's wife is in the house, Chance. Please look her over." While Walter spoke, Kieran walked ahead and led the way. Walter walked alongside Jared and explained his relationship with Kieran. It turned out that they were childhood friends, and Walter had also used to live in a single-story house in the area when he was young. Of course, that was decades ago. He had left after attending school and had slowly gone into politics. In time, he rarely contacted his old friends anymore. After he had retired and returned to Horrington once more, he got in touch with his old friends. He then wanted to help Kieran move from the suburbs and buy him a house in the city, but Kieran was reluctant to leave. Hence, he relented. The two of them often chatted over tea. While Kieran led a humble life, he found it very fulfilling and had never asked Walter for anything. However, a few days ago, he had suddenly sought the man out and implored him to help find a skilled doctor to treat his wife. Walter was well respected and had vast connections, so it would be a piece of cake for him to find a skilled doctor. However, Walter immediately surmised that Kieran's wife wasn't simply sick after hearing about her condition. For that reason, he went to Jared. Soon, they arrived at a courtyard with Kieran leading the way. The courtyard was exceedingly small, housing only 3 brick rooms, while a corner was dedicated to rearing chickens and ducks. An unpleasant stench hung in the air. The moment they stepped into the courtyard, Josephine's brows furrowed slightly. She clapped a hand over her nose and mouth, repulsed by the malodor, as she seldom visited such a place. Conversely, Jared wasn't perturbed, as he had lived in a village for more than 10 years before moving to the city with his mother. No sooner had they entered the house than the shrieks of a woman from the room on their left drifted into their ears. Her voice was shrill and sounded particularly terrifying. I'm going to kill you all. I'm going to execute the lot of you. I'm now the queen, and I want to sentence you all to death." Her screams and wails scared Josephine so much that she went as pale as a sheet. She clutched at Jared's sleeve, regretting her decision to come with him. Kieran then opened the room door on the left, revealing an elderly woman in her 60s with white hair and a wrinkled face, screeching madly right then. There was nothing in the room save a single bed. The second the elderly woman saw someone entering the room, she leaped onto the bed. "Who are the lot of you? How dare you barge into my palace? I'm going to have you all arrested," she bellowed with widened eyes. "I found someone to look you over. Darling. Please stop kicking up a fuss." Kieran went over to soothe his wife. Unexpectedly, the elderly woman darted forward and bit him hard before sprinting over to the corner. "Oh, well." Kieran heaved a helpless sigh at that turn of events. "How long has your wife been in such a condition? And does she remain mentally unstable all the time?" Jared asked Kieran. "It's been 7 or 8 days now. She's not mentally unstable all the time, but the times she's cognizant are growing increasingly far between," Kieran answered with anxiety etched on his face. I heard from Mr. Grange that this condition of your wife started after you both returned from a trip to the cemetery. Jared continued inquiring. Kieran nodded in affirmation. That's right. My wife said that she missed our son a few days ago, so I brought her to the cemetery for a visit. Alas, she started acting up that night. Kieran's son passed away some years ago from an accident. Mr. Chance. Walter hastily explained to Jared. As Jared looked at Kieran and his wife, a wealth of sympathy filled him. Losing a child at old age is the most tragic thing ever. Did anything strange happen after the two of you went to the cemetery? He questioned. Kieran pondered for a moment before shaking his head. No, everything was quite normal. Nothing happened. Mr. Chance. Could it be that Kieran's wife is possessed? Walter asked in a whisper. Let me check her over before drawing any conclusions. After saying that, Jared took out a cloth pouch with rows of silver needles arranged neatly. He swiftly whipped out a silver needle and headed toward the elderly woman in the corner. Seeing that, Kieran hurriedly blocked his path. You've got to be careful so that my wife doesn't hurt you. She doesn't recognize anyone now. Don't worry. I'll be fine. Jared flashed him a smile. When he reached the elderly woman, she rushed at him without warning and opened her mouth to bite him. Jared promptly inserted the silver needle in his hand into her neck, causing her to freeze before falling back onto the bed with a thud. At that sight, Kieran dashed over and shook his wife vigorously. When she remained motionless, he panicked and roared at Jared. What did you do to my wife? Is she dead? Kieran grew very emotional and was seemingly a moment away from getting physical with Jared. Upon seeing that, Walter instantly zipped forward and held him back. Kieran, Mr. Chance is here to treat your wife. What are you doing? Don't worry, for your wife is just unconscious. She'll be fine. Having said that, Jared sat on the bed and placed a hand on the elderly woman's pulse. On the heels of that, a burst of pure spiritual energy left his body and streamed into hers. If she were possessed, his spiritual energy would undoubtedly be able to force the spirit out. Regretfully, no matter how much he increased the flow of his spiritual energy, she remained still without the slightest reaction. At that, Jared frowned slightly. Could it be that I made a mistake? In the beginning, he had thought that she was possessed by a malicious spirit, and he only needed to force it out before absorbing it into himself. However, it seemed that she wasn't possessed after all. Mr. Chance, Walter called out softly when nothing happened after a long while, and he noticed something off about Jared's expression. At that moment, Josephine mustered her courage and went up behind Jared. Despite her fear, she was still curious and wanted to see how exactly a spirit looked like. A long time passed without anything transpiring, and the atmosphere in the entire room turned a tad awkward. Jared slowly retracted his hand, sweat beading on his forehead. He had used too much spiritual energy earlier, so he was a touch enervated. She's not suffering from hysteria, so I'll check for other causes. After saying that, he picked up a silver needle and gently inserted it into the elderly woman's wrist. Then he slowly twisted it. Soon, almost the entire needle was embedded in her wrist. A moment later, he took it out, only to see a drop of black blood beading at her wrist. Everyone was shocked when they saw that her blood was black. That went doubly for Kieran. He wore a worried expression and seemingly wanted to speak. Yet he was afraid that he would break Jared's concentration. What's going on here, Mr. Chance? Walter was also baffled, since it made no sense that an ordinary person would have black blood. This is a symptom of poisoning. From the look of things, that's the cause of her mental disorder, leading to her being of unsound mind, Jared explained. Poisoning. Walter was startled. Turning to Kieran, he queried, what did your wife eat before she started acting up? Kieran, how did she get poisoned? With a frown marring his countenance, Kieran mulled it over before shaking his head. She didn't eat anything. She just had a simple meal after returning from the cemetery. I ate the same thing as well. So why am I fine? Walter didn't know what to say to that, so he shifted his gaze to Jared. Recall carefully whether your wife ate or drank anything after going to the cemetery, including wild fruits and herbs. Or did she touch anything at all? Jared questioned Kieran solemnly. And no, she didn't touch anything. Despite Kieran's denial, he averted his gaze when answering and dared not look the man in the eye. Noticing his shifty expression, Jared knew that he was definitely lying. Since the man wasn't willing to speak the truth, he couldn't do anything to help despite sympathizing with them. In that case, please accept my apologies. This is beyond my capabilities. He put the silver needles away and got ready to leave. At that turn of events, Kieran started panicking. Meanwhile, Walter could also tell that Kieran was seemingly hiding something. So he snapped, "Kieran, I got Mr. Chance here to treat your wife. Yet you're unwilling to be candid with us. Do you want your wife to die?" Kieran had a conflicted look on his face while he stared at his wife on the bed. At long last, he gritted his teeth and admitted, "We indeed found something at the cemetery, and my wife brought it home." "What was it?" Walter and Jared asked in unison. It was a reishi mushroom. It was gigantic and resembled a reishi mushroom, yet a bit different from the usual ones. My wife was convinced that it would fetch a high price, so she brought it home, Kieran confessed with embarrassment written all over his face. "Where is it? Let me have a look at it," Jared ordered. Nodding, Kieran left the room. Shortly after, he came back in with a huge glass bottle in his hands. Indeed, something that resembled a reishi mushroom lay in the glass bottle. However, it didn't at all appear to be a plant. "This is no reishi mushroom. It's clearly a piece of rotten meat." When Josephine saw the item in the glass bottle, she almost hurled. "This isn't rotten meat. It's indeed a plant that grows on the ground, but it appears like meat." While saying that, Kieran opened the glass bottle and took it out. "Watch out, Kieran. It might be poisonous." Walter promptly cried out upon noticing that Kieran was planning to take it out with his bare hands. "It's fine. I've already touched it back then. So I would have been poisoned long ago if it's really poisonous." Kieran wasn't at all afraid, blithely taking out the item resembling a reishi mushroom. "In that case, your wife can't possibly have been poisoned by it either," Walter said. "Since he's fine after holding it, his wife couldn't possibly have been poisoned in the same manner. Having skin contact with it is fine, but taking a bite out of it will result in the person being poisoned." As Jared spoke, he took the item resembling a reishi mushroom from Kieran and turned it over in his hands gently. Subsequently, he glimpsed a tiny portion missing at the bottom, making it abundantly clear that someone had taken a bite out of it. When Kieran saw that tiny missing portion, surprise inundated him. "I told her not to simply eat it when its exact nature is yet uncertain. I never thought that she'd actually take a bite out of it furtively. If I'd known, I wouldn't have allowed her to put it away." Stark regret flooded him, and he kept thumping his chest. "Don't blame yourself anymore, Kieran. I'm sure Mr. Chance can treat your wife." Stopping the man from inflicting harm upon himself, Walter looked at Jared and inquired, "What exactly is it, Mr. Chance?" "It doesn't look like a reishi mushroom." Jared took the item back from Kieran and squeezed it gently, upon which it seemingly twitched as though having sensed something. "This is known as the aconite or meat reishi mushroom. It grows at places where the geomancy is at extreme ends and nature is imbalanced. Although this is also a type of plant, it has eyes like an animal and is able to see the world. It has different names as its eyes increase in number. When it has all 5 senses, it becomes an aconite mushroom. It's exceedingly rare, since it's usually plucked by mistake or eaten by animals when it's in its infancy stage. Very few make it to maturity." Jared then continued explaining in detail. "It's very poisonous and absorbs its nutrients from decaying meat in the soil, so it has a high propensity of growing in the cemetery. Your wife is lucky that she only took a small bite. Otherwise, no one will be able to save her. Despite its rarity, it doesn't have much medicinal value. If you had made it into a medicinal wine, the person who drank it would have probably died on the spot." Kieran trembled in fright after hearing that. "Fortunately, I hadn't any time to make it into a medicinal wine, since my wife took ill. Otherwise, I would have been doomed as well." "So, is there any cure for Kieran's wife, Mr. Chance?" Walter asked in a murmur. Yes. Jared nodded and returned the meat reishi mushroom to Kieran. Then he took out his silver needles and inserted them into Kieran's wife at lightning speed. A while later, Kieran's wife regained consciousness and coughed up a mouthful of black blood. With a wave of his hand, Jared retrieved all the silver needles and placed them back in the cloth pouch. All is good now. She'll be right as rain after resting for a few days, Jared said to Kieran. Darling, darling, Kieran hurriedly called out to his wife. The elderly woman slowly opened her eyes. When she saw the crowd in the room, she murmured in bewilderment, "Why are there so many people here, Kieran?" "Oh, don't worry about it. They're here to treat you. You're fine now, so just rest," Kieran urged in euphoria when he had ascertained that his wife had truly recovered. Jared and the others left the room quietly and went to the courtyard. When Kieran came out, he dropped to his knees before Jared right away. Jared was stunned for a moment, but he swiftly reached out and pulled the man up, without allowing the latter's knees to touch the ground. "You're truly my family's savior. I thank you for your kindness. We don't have much money, so I really don't know how I should repay you." Kieran kept thanking him incessantly. He was skeptical in the beginning, but he was then eternally grateful to Jared. "Mr. Chance isn't here for money, so you don't need to do this," Kieran Walter advised. "If it were because of money, he wouldn't be here." "True, true. He isn't hurting for money at all." Kieran nodded fervently. After all, he had seen Jared and Josephine arriving in a luxurious car, so Jared couldn't possibly be strapped for cash. "Let me get you a few chickens and ducks instead, so that you can have a feast later, Mr. Chance. I rear them myself, and they're all well taken care of." While saying that, he made to go and catch a few chickens and ducks for Jared. At that, Jared quickly stopped him from doing so, asserting, "Don't be such a stranger with me, Mr. Snyder. If you really want to thank me, do you mind giving me the meat reishi mushroom? I don't mind paying for it." Hearing that, Kieran was stumped and regarded the man with a look of puzzlement. "Didn't you say that it has no medicinal value and is poisonous instead, Mr. Chance? Why do you want it?" "Indeed, it's of no use to the average person. However, I need it for my training." It so happened that Jared could use it in his training. In fact, he believed that he would improve by leaps and bounds if he absorbed the essence of the meat reishi mushroom. "Since it's of use to you, just take it, Mr. Chance. I'm going to dump it anyway, as I don't dare keep it at home anymore." Without an ounce of hesitation, Kieran handed the meat reishi mushroom in his hand to Jared. Jared wanted to pay for it, but Kieran staunchly declined and refused to take his money. After leaving Kieran's house, Josephine lamented in disappointment. "I initially thought that I'd get to see some novel things, but there was nothing at all." At the sight of her crestfallen expression, Jared chuckled softly. "There aren't that many ghosts and spirits in this world. Anyway, just don't pass out in fright if you do have the opportunity to see them. That won't happen with you protecting me." Josephine beamed at him. After dropping Jared off, Josephine sped off, and no sooner had the former gone upstairs did Hilda slowly come out from behind a gigantic tree in the courtyard in the neighborhood. She stared at the man's back, a riot of emotions brewing within her. She had been secretly waiting there for him, wanting to see who exactly the woman was. However, she didn't get to do so, since it was too dark, and Josephine didn't alight from the car. "Let's go home, sweetie. If he really chose to date the rich girl, that's his choice," Chloe murmured, patting her daughter gently on the shoulder. "Yeah," Hilda nodded, but tears shimmered in her eyes. When Jared arrived home, he went to bed early. It was Saturday the following day, so he was planning to make a trip to Dragon Bay. The spiritual energy there was more bountiful, and there was no one to disrupt him. Therefore, it was the perfect opportunity for him to absorb the essence of the meat reishi mushroom. At the same time, Leighton was sitting across from Felix with his injured arm in a cast in the general manager's office in Vintage Restaurant. "So, why did you have someone contact me, Mr. Scott?" Felix questioned while pouring Leighton a cup of tea personally. The Scott family was considered a wealthy family in Horrington. While the Crimson Dragon Gang wasn't afraid of the Scott family, the affluent families were money trees, so he knew that Leighton was there to give him money. "House viewing. Early the following morning, Jared went to his mansion at Dragon Bay, with the meat reishi mushroom in hand, after informing his parents that he was going out. At that very moment, Zane, Maria, and Lydia were arguing with the security guard at the entrance of Dragon Bay. "Why are you forbidding us from entering? We're here to buy a house. Is this how you treat your clients?" Maria bellowed at the security guard. She was initially in a good mood when she came to take a look at the houses in Dragon Bay. When the commission was approved, she would have enough for the down payment for a place there. While she couldn't afford a mansion on the hill, she could apply for a loan and purchase one at the foot of the hill. Unexpectedly, the security guard refused to let them in when they arrived. That had her flipping her lid. "If you want to buy a house, you can go to the sales gallery next door. Entry is prohibited before you're a property owner," the security guard replied indifferently. "How are we to buy a house if we don't go in and view the property?" Maria continued contending. "If you want to have a viewing, you can have a sales representative bring you in. You can't enter alone. That's our policy here." The security guard remained rooted at the entrance, blocking them from entering the neighborhood. "Forget about it, Maria. Let's go to the sales gallery first, and have the sales representative bring us in," Zane urged as he tugged at Maria. Although he was likewise miffed, he didn't dare kick up a fuss there. Since they were in Dragon Bay, the best neighborhood in the whole of Horrington, all who lived there were big shots, so he dared not make a scene when he was just an insignificant department manager. Following that, Maria could only shoot the security guard a glare and threaten, "Just you wait. When I've become a property owner here, I'll have the management sack you." They then left and went to the sales gallery. Meanwhile, the security guard sneered. "How ridiculous. She really thinks that she's some bigwig." Mere moments after they had left, Jared arrived in his car, the second-hand Ford. When the security guards spotted the car from afar, one of them immediately waved and signaled Jared to stop. They had been working at Dragon Bay for quite some time, but they had never seen any of the property owners there driving a Ford. Jared brought the car to a stop, and a security guard trotted over to ask him about the purpose of his visit. The moment Jared rolled down his car window, however, the security guard fell into a trance upon catching a glimpse of Jared. A long while passed before the guard gathered his wits about him. "Oh, it's you, Mr. Chance. I'm really sorry about this." Jared had been living at the mansion at the top of the mountain back then, and that was the most expensive mansion in the whole of Dragon Bay. For that reason, all the security guards recognized him. "It's okay." Jared flashed him a faint smile. In no time, the security guard waved a hand. "Hurry up and open the gate. It's Mr. Chance." Upon hearing that it was Jared, the security guard at the entrance hurriedly opened the gate. When Jared drove past, all the guards promptly saluted him. But just when he was about to enter the gate, a red Maserati darted in front of his car, wanting to cut him off and get into the neighborhood ahead of him. Having insufficient time to brake, he rear-ended the Maserati. That turn of events rendered the few security guards dumbfounded. Never had they expected a car to zip over all of a sudden and cause an accident. As the accident happened at the entrance of the neighborhood, they were also considered partially responsible. Therefore, they all glowered at the red Maserati. "Do you even know how to drive? How dare you ram into my car when you're just driving a shabby Ford? Do you know how much my car costs?" A woman with sunglasses and a fashionable straw hat on her head started cursing at Jared after getting out of the car. She was infuriated when she saw that her beloved car took a hit. "I've heard that your capabilities are outstanding, and I can see today that it's indeed true, Mr. Lawson. Considering your muscular build, even 3 or 5 burly men aren't your match." Leighton complimented endlessly. "Haha, you don't have to flatter me, Mr. Scott. Just speak freely about whatever matter it is. If it's within my capability, I'll definitely do my best to assist you." Felix boomed while guffawing. "Honestly speaking, Mr. Lawson, I've got an enemy. I'd like to ask you for some men to assist me in my bid for revenge. I'll reward you with 10 million after the matter has been settled. Here's 5 million as a deposit." While saying that, Leighton slipped a bank card over to Felix. Haha, as expected of a wealthy heir. How generous. Felix was a tad surprised that Leighton was offering 10 million right off the bat. However, he abruptly put away his smile after a few barks of laughter, staring at Leighton solemnly. He remarked, "I know that Tommy Lewis owes the Scott family a favor. Why didn't you go to him for this matter? Besides, the Scott family employs quite a number of bodyguards. No. Why would you come and seek the Crimson Dragon Gang out instead? The Crimson Dragon Gang and Templar Regiment have always been at odds. Aren't you taking the hard way by abandoning Templar Regiment and coming to the Crimson Dragon Gang?" He knew a bit of backstory between the Scott family and Tommy, since it was no secret. HMPH. Don't mention that ungrateful wretch. If it weren't for the Scott family, he would have died on the streets long ago. Now, however, he has become the Sullivan family's dog, and has long since cut off all ties with the Scott family. Leighton snarled furiously at the mention of Tommy. He then explained, "As for the bodyguards of the Scott family, I can't mobilize any single one of them. They only obey my father's orders, and he thinks that I'm still recuperating in the hospital right now." "Haha, I got it now." Felix nodded in understanding. Subsequently, he added, "Indeed, Tommy has gotten quite close with the Sullivan family recently. Anyway, don't tell me that your enemy is the son of some official. If so, I've got to warn you that the Crimson Dragon Gang always stays on their good side. Don't worry, Mr. Lawson. It's just an ordinary person who knows some martial arts. He's no son of an official or the like." Leighton hastily shook his head. "Great. I'll have Adrian lead a dozen men and seek you out tomorrow, Mr. Scott. You can decide however you'd like to deal with your enemy," Felix stated mildly. "Is it possible to send more men, Mr. Lawson?" Leighton queried uneasily upon hearing that Felix was only planning to send a dozen men over. After all, Jared was too powerful, and Leighton had personally witnessed Jared defeating several people within seconds. "Why? How powerful is that enemy of yours that even a dozen men aren't enough?" Felix was slightly taken aback at that request. No, he isn't all that powerful. I just want to bring more men so that it'll look more imposing." Leighton kept the truth to himself, not daring to tell Felix that Jared was extraordinarily skilled for fear that Felix would back out or demand more money. "All right, then, since you said as much, Mr. Scott, I'll send 30 men over for a show of strength. I hope we'll have more opportunities to work together in the future." Lumbering to his feet, Felix shook hands with him. "I thank you in advance then, Mr. Lawson," Leighton exclaimed exuberantly. After leaving Vintage Restaurant, Leighton got back into his car. Sandy was waiting for him in the car. "How did it go, Lee?" Sandy asked urgently. HMPH. "Just wait and see how Jared is going to kneel before us and beg for mercy tomorrow. I'm going to crush him under my feet and have him know my might." Leighton crowed triumphantly, his eyes glinting coldly. Previous chapter. "I will bankrupt you." Jared had initially wanted to settle the matter peacefully, even though it was the other party's fault for overtaking his car at the gate of a neighborhood. However, he didn't expect her to lay into him right after she got out of the car. That had his temper spiking at once. "You were the one who abruptly dashed in front of my car. So, why are you blaming me for hitting your car?" Jared demanded. "Why? Well, you shouldn't have blocked my path when you're only driving a rickety Ford. Is this a place for someone like you?" The woman eyed him with contempt before she roared at the security guards. "Are the lot of you doing your job? How could you allow such a car into the neighborhood? This is just too embarrassing for the neighborhood and the property owners." The few security guards merely looked at the arrogant woman, not daring to riposte her, despite the fury blazing within them. They were only security guards at the end of the day, so they couldn't afford to offend her. At the woman's haughty demeanor, Jared was seized by the urge to step forward and slap her, remembering that he was in a rush to train. However, he didn't want to waste his time there. Thus, he snapped, "Name your figure. How much do you want? I don't have the time to bicker with you here." When the woman noticed his impatience, she immediately raised her voice several decibels and proclaimed, "Do you know how much my car costs? It costs over $2 million. I won't be able to repair the damage from your hit without 100 to 200 grand. You wouldn't be able to compensate me even if you were to give me your car. Cut the crap and just name your price." Jared's brows knitted together. "How dare you say that? Do you believe that I'll—" While saying that, The woman raised her hand to strike Jared across the face. However, Jared caught her hand and slapped her hard instead. The woman's sunglasses went flying, and even the straw hat on her head fell off. That had her freezing for a moment. Never in her wildest dreams had she ever expected Jared to have the guts to get physical with her. How dare he make a move against me when he's just driving a Ford? Great, just great. How dare you hit me, kid? I swear by all that's holy that I'm going to kill you today. As she screeched, she whipped out her phone and made a call. The security guards inwardly rejoiced when Jared struck the woman, but they were also aware that the matter had gotten serious when things had turned physical. One of them quickly rushed away to get the property manager. After making her call, the woman glared at Jared hotly. "Just you wait, kid. My husband will be coming to kill you in a while. I don't have time to waste with you here. If you don't move your car, I'm going to plow into it." Jared didn't want to continue arguing with her. He hadn't been training regularly these few days, so he wished to make the most of his time. "You dare plow into my car? Go ahead if you have the guts to do so. Just see whether I'll bankrupt you," the woman challenged. She didn't believe that he truly dared to do so. "My car is a luxurious car worth a few million, so he can't possibly afford to pay the compensation." Seeing her obstinacy, Jared knew that it was no use speaking further. Hence, he got into his car and geared up to ram into the Maserati ahead. But at just that precise moment, Zane and the others were brought in by a sales representative to view the property. "Jared!" Maria exclaimed in astonishment the second she caught sight of the man. After all, not anyone could be there. People who had neither wealth nor influence like Jared seldom visited such a place, so she wondered why he was there. When Jared saw that it was Maria, Zane, and Lydia, he casually inquired, "Why are you guys here?" "You're asking us that. Shouldn't it be the other way round? We're here to buy a house. Why are you here?" Zane regarded him with utter disdain, before glancing at his car that had collided with the Maserati ahead. All at once, he gloatingly commented, "Jared, your driving skills are really lacking. How did you crash into the car ahead? Was it because you were trying to barge in behind the car? Not all that bad." It was also then that Lydia noticed Jared had hit another car with his, and it was a Maserati at that. She instantly exclaimed, "You've hit the jackpot, Jared. You could have rammed into any car, but it just had to be a Maserati. This car costs a few million. So I'm afraid that your car insurance probably can't cover it. That's no concern of yours, so please keep out of it." "It's my own business," Jared asserted coldly. "Jared, let me tell you this. The company will never agree to a salary advance. Why did you have to roam around in a shabby car? I'm afraid that you're going to go bankrupt this time." The corners of Zane's mouth turned up, and undisguised jubilance showed on his face. "What exactly happened here, Jared? You're truly in hot water now." Maria chided Jared with a frown. "It's no big deal. It's just a paltry car crash, isn't it?" Jared smirked, for it didn't even register as a blip on his radar. "A paltry car crash? Please open your eyes wide and look at the car you hit. This is a Maserati that costs a few million. You know." Lydia sneered. "Jared, I'd advise you to ride a motorbike instead. You're not suited to drive a car. You hit a Maserati today, but you might hit a Porsche tomorrow. If that happens, you won't be able to afford the compensation, even if you were to auction yourself off." Zane earnestly persuaded Jared, but his eyes radiated scorn. Meanwhile, the woman at the side was all the more convinced that Jared was merely a deadbeat, with no connections whatsoever. Upon seeing Zane and the others mocking him, thus she shouted, "Weren't you as bold as brass, saying that you want to plow into my car, kid? Go ahead if you dare." She kept challenging and provoking him endlessly. Not in the mood to yak with her, Jared got into his car to ram into the Maserati. Seeing that, Maria grabbed him. "Have you lost your mind, Jared? Get out! Do you know how much the car costs? If you were to hit it impulsively, you wouldn't be able to afford the compensation, even if you were to empty your savings and sell your house off." She initially didn't want to bother about him, but she couldn't stand idly by when it was such a grave issue of crashing into a Maserati. "He'll have to pay a ton in compensation, and if he can't afford it, He'll just come to my family and ask for a loan. Just let him be Maria. Isn't he all high and mighty? Let him ram into it. If he can't afford to pay the compensation, he can go to prison. It's not like he hasn't been to prison before. Zane wore a frosty expression on his face, chagrined that she stopped Jared from acting. If he were to really crash into it, he'd have to pay a couple million in compensation. That's no joke. Even if Jared's family were to sell off their house, they wouldn't be able to fork out that much money. What's going to happen to his parents then? Maria snapped, shooting him a glare. Indeed, she detested Jared and didn't really like his family either, for she felt that they were deliberately clinging to her rich family just to obtain some benefits. Nonetheless, that didn't mean that she wanted them to end up destitute and homeless. If he acts impulsively and plows into the car for real, his entire family will be doomed. At the sight of her staunch defense of Jared, Zane was filled with fury. Meanwhile, Jared cast Maria a glance, and his impression of her improved significantly. It looks like she's not all that bad. At that exact moment, 2 vans sped over. A dozen menacing-looking men then climbed out with batons in their hands. "Darling." The woman trotted over to the man in sportswear and coquettishly griped, "Darling, someone hit me just now. Look at my face." After scrutinizing her face, the man flew into a rage. With a glacial expression, he demanded, "Who hit my wife? Step out right now."